Just to kind of reframe the book of Joshua, if you will, the first 5 chapters plus are all in preparation for entering this land that God has been promising since chapter 12 of Genesis. And then the next 7 chapters are really entering the land, these great battles that we've seen, Jericho and Ai and Bethel and the southern campaign and the big campaign against the north and the great city-state of Hatzor. And then there's a rather large section, almost half the book, which is why a lot of people lose themselves in the book of Joshua and get frustrated because it's kind of a long read, is the allocation of the land. And I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it, but there's some nuggets in there. And so what I'll do this morning very quickly is just touch on a half a dozen things between Joshua chapter 13 and Joshua chapter 21 that I think are worth mentioning. And then the last portion, the last 3 chapters are really on these final words, mostly from Joshua, and some final things going on where they really needed to figure out how to hold on to this land. So just some quick highlights on this big section of 13 through 21 that I think are worth noting. First of all, Joshua starts apportioning to the land to the tribes of Israel. And what's neat is Moses was actually already told where the allotments are. And so all Joshua's doing is following up what Moses told him, which is what God told Moses. And Moses had never been there, which is really kind of a cool thought that God shared this with Moses, knowing that Moses would never get to enter it. A second thing to mention, just to remind you, there are 12 tribes. 2.5 of the tribes, the tribe of Reuben, the tribe of Gad, and then half of the tribe of Manasseh, actually, if you remember, encamped on the eastern side of the Jordan River, which would be modern-day Jordan. And so 2.5 of the tribes have been settled the whole time. And there was a big discussion that went on with not only with Moses, but also with Joshua, saying, here's the deal. We'll let you have this land, but you're coming with us. You're not just going to sit over here and start your little life while the other 9.5 tribes get the proverbial you-know-what beat out of them in these battles. You're coming with us. We're one. We're 12 tribes, but we are Israel together. And so that's what's been going on. And these 2.5 tribes are going to come up again heavily this morning, so it's important to remember that. A third thing that we see, if you'll recall back with Moses and Joshua, Moses, way back in the early days, before the children of Israel sinned and wandered in the desert, he sends, if you remember, 12 spies to go check the land out. And they come back. 10 of the spies go, it's a horrible place. There's literal giants there. We can't go. No faith whatsoever. 2 of the dudes, you remember who they are, Joshua and Caleb, say, I don't know what they're talking about. It's the best place we've ever seen. We know God can do this. Well, you know the story. God says basically because of the unfaithfulness of these people, they're just going to wander around an 11-mile circle for 40 years until they all die off and the next generation gets to go into the land. God never forgets this. And so not only have we seen what God is doing with Joshua, he never forgets Caleb. And Caleb's family, when you read chapters 13 through 21, get a special allotment of land because God never, ever forgot what he saw in Caleb's life. There's huge encouragement for us. Again, we give so little credit to ourselves. And because our faith to us seems so flimsy and so small and so fleeting. I was sitting here like I always do every Sunday morning, just listening to the worship music and praying. And my mind is going between praying for the service and the word and you, and then just 100 things are just scattering my brain that need to be done, haven't been done, aren't being done properly. And I'm laughing at myself praying, just thinking, look at me, God. I can't even hold a prayer for 5 minutes with you. I'm so scattered. And yet God looks at that and says, yeah, but for 12 seconds, brother. Now you laugh, but this is God. See, the rest of the world for those 5 minutes never thinks of God. Day after day. And God says, I entered into your mind for 12 seconds. That honors me. And God never forgot Caleb. A fourth quick thing to highlight, the Levites. You remember the priests come from the tribe of Levi. And the Levites don't get land. They don't get any portion of land. And the reason for that is God is their portion. God is their inheritance. So what they do is they wire in 48 cities scattered throughout the land and throughout the tribes. And there are Levites in each of the 48 cities. And they conduct themselves as priests for the rest of the people. Their primary function, believe it or not, is not like burning animals up and doing sacrifices, though that is, of course, an important thing at the tabernacle. Their most important function was supposed to be doing what I'm doing this morning, which is to take the story of God and disseminate it to the people so they never forget, which is why Israel so seldom did well, because they so seldom did their job and didn't teach the people, and then the people forgot God. A fifth point, the tabernacle and the tent of meeting, if you will, where the Ark of the Covenant is, where God met the people. It's been mobile. It's built out of seal skins, and then there's the Ark of the Covenant inside with curtains and all this stuff, and they've been carrying this thing and moving it every day while they wandered in the desert and across the Jordan and all this stuff. It begins now to hold itself in one spot for the first time, and it lands in a place called Shiloh, eventually before it is moved to Jerusalem on a more permanent basis. And then obviously Solomon builds the huge temple, of which the Temple Mount still exists in Israel. I only mention that to you because if you read forward in the book of Judges, and in particular in the book of 1 Samuel, Shiloh becomes an important place because that's where the tabernacle is, that's where the presence of God is, and that's all I'll say on that. One other thought, and I'll read to you from chapter 18, verses 1 through 3. If you're in the book of Joshua, you can follow along. And this is fascinating to me. 7 of the tribes just can't still quite get their act together as the land's being apportioned. Chapter 18, verse 1 says this: Then the whole congregation of the people of Israel assembled at Shiloh and set up the tent of meeting there, and that's the tabernacle within it, and the land lay subdued before them. There remained among the people of Israel 7 tribes whose inheritance had not yet been apportioned. I love this. So Joshua, by the way, who's very old at this point, said to these 7 tribes of Israel, "How long will you put off going in to take possession of the land which the Lord, the God of your fathers, has given you?" What a fascinating comment that is to me. Even though these 7 tribes have seen God do miracle after miracle, he parts the Jordan for 20 miles of dry dirt that they cross. He drops Jericho by kazoos, right? Marching around the city after city. And what happens to the 7 tribes? They get passive. And I think there's a huge warning for us in this. This is what we tend to do in our life. We rely upon the yesterday success when God is speaking to us today and saying, lean in with me. Look for me today. Watch for me today. What am I tapping you on the shoulder with today? Who am I asking you to stop your schedule with for 2 seconds and lean in with? Who am I asking you to break through what is normally what you don't do and lean into confrontation, lean into relationship, lean into, oh my gosh, I don't like to sit around a table. This is very uncomfortable for me. Guess what? It's good for you. Let's not be like these 7 tribes. One last note, and I think this is a cool thing, and I'll let you read this on your own, but in chapter 20, God has Joshua and Israel set up, and you don't need to read it because I'm not going to read any verses from there. This is homework for you, Ryan Lillis, later on. God has them set up 6 cities of refuge so that if a crime takes place and something happens, to prevent that town or neighborhood or community from getting all crazy and enacting immediate justice when they don't really know the whole situation, the person that is in this situation can run to the city of refuge, and they're not allowed to be touched, and then everything can settle down, and then they can have justice served and then actually have a court session and figure out what really took place. This is God's idea of justice. And those 6 cities are all within 1 day's walk of anywhere you lived in Israel. This is God. I mean, this is really cool stuff. And that's in chapter 20 if you're into kind of how the courts should really work. God's really quite intelligent about it. Chapter 21, and we'll begin to kind of look at what we want to look at this morning. Verse 43. Thus the Lord gave to Israel all the land that he swore to give their fathers. And they took possession of it, and they settled there. And the Lord gave them rest on every side, just as he had sworn to their fathers. Not one of all their enemies had withstood them, for the Lord had given all their enemies into their hands. Not one word of all the good promises that the Lord had made to the house of Israel had failed. All of it came to pass. Wow, what a statement. But you have to ask yourself, did it feel like this to Abraham? Or his son Isaac, or his son Jacob, who never, ever had a permanent home in this land, and yet they were all promised it? Did it feel like this to Jacob's sons, and more importantly, their sons' future generations when they were enslaved for hundreds of years in Egypt? Did it feel like this for the children of Israel, where they wandered for 40 years until every single person in that community died off? Did it even feel like this to Joshua and to the Israelites, when they finally cross the Jordan and all they get is fight after fight after fight after fight? God is faithful to every one of these people. Not only is God faithful to Israel, he came through for Joshua. In the beginning of this book, he promises Joshua 3 things. I'm going to give you the land, done. I'm going to give you rest on every side, done. I'm going to make it so that nobody can stand against you, done. Every single thing that God said to Joshua and Israel, God did. He comes through, even when it doesn't look like he's coming through. And why is this important to us? This is not Israel's history. This is Israel and our history. This is as if you're sitting down, my folks are getting of old age, and my mom, very often as we sit, and I want her to, would jump into stories of her childhood and stories of her siblings and stories of her parents and her grandparents. And most of us were fascinated with this, aren't we? I mean, it's interesting because I don't know what my great-grandfather, I don't know when they came here. I just, Scottish, Irish, I don't know, did they bring the Guinness over with them? I have no clue how this went by. I believe that is in my heritage, but that hasn't been proven yet. This is literally our history. And so when we read these stories, this is who God is, our God, and this is our heritage. And so we're reading the faithfulness of God to us, not just to Joshua. And we need to see it that way. Let's read on. Chapter 22, verse 1. At that time, Joshua summoned the Reubenites and the Gadites and the half-tribe of Manasseh. So these are the two and a half tribes that live east of the Jordan. He pulls them in together because they're done fighting. And he says to them, "You have kept all that Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded you, and have obeyed my voice in all that I commanded you. You have not forsaken your brothers these many days, down to this day, but have been careful to keep the charge of the Lord your God." Super impressive, right? "And now the Lord your God has given rest to your brothers, as he promised them. Therefore turn and go to your own tents in the land where your possession lies, which Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you on the other side of the Jordan. Only when you go there, be careful to observe the commandments of the law that Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded you, to love the Lord your God and to walk in his ways and to keep his commandments and to cling to him and to serve him with all your heart and with all your soul." So Joshua blessed them and sent them away, and they went to their tents. Verse 9. So the people of Reuben and the people of Gad and the half-tribe of Manasseh returned home, parting from the people of Israel at Shiloh, which is in the land of Canaan, to go to the land of Gilead, their own land, of which they had possessed themselves by command of the Lord through Moses. So the land is all apportioned. Everybody's got their piece of property, and so they're all starting to go. And you'd think, whew, now the work is done. Actually, it's almost like, well, that piece of work was done. Now the next piece of work. Nobody has a house. If you know Israel, it's a rocky place. Every field, it takes, years to clear a section of property from all the rocks before you can till it, before you can plant crops and trees and get your herds settled with all your sheep. There's work to be done. And they've all got to do this. And not just them, Joshua's not done. Even though in the last sermon we looked at, twice it says in that section, he was old, old. He's not done. And so what does he do at the end of his life? He turns to the 2.5 tribes in Israel, and he realizes they have a unique set of issues, but I want to frame this for them. I want to shepherd them properly. They have a problem. The problem is they're separated from the 9.5 tribes because of the Jordan River. They're not next to them. They're not with them. And so this brings up 2 issues. Number one, the tabernacle is in Shiloh. It's west of the Jordan. So they don't have easy access to the tabernacle and to the presence of God. And so that's separated. That's hard right there. And on top of it, they're not with their brothers and sisters of Israel now. They're physically separated. And as you know, when you're not in consistent communication with your, thank you, Anna Wright, your community, we don't do well. Right? We match the Trinity. We are the image of the Trinity. The Father and the Son and the Spirit don't do well when they're not together. And the reason we don't do well when we're not together is because we're made from the 3 of them. And so Joshua sees this, and he wants to make sure they remain united with each other and have a deep sense still of God, though they're a distance away and removed from the tabernacle. Verse 10, and when they came to the region of the Jordan, that is in the land of Canaan, the people of Reuben and the people of Gad and the half-tribe of Manasseh built there an altar by the Jordan, an altar of imposing size. And the people of Israel, meaning the other 9.5 tribes, heard it and said, behold, the people of Reuben and Gad and Manasseh have built the altar at the frontier of the land of Canaan, in the region about the Jordan, on the side that belongs to the people of Israel. And when the people of Israel heard it, the whole assembly of the people of Israel gathered at Shiloh to make war with them. So the 2.5 tribes get blessed, they're ready to go home, and right when they get to the Jordan, and we're not sure which side it is, scholars aren't sure, is it on the west side of the Jordan, on the east? One verse makes it sound like the west, one looks like the east. They build this massive rock structure that looks a lot like an altar. And Israel finds out about it, the other 9.5 tribes, and they have a massive reaction to this. The western tribes see it, and they assumed they've now built an altar to God or a God that is not in Shiloh in the tabernacle. The Torah specifically tells Israel there's one place you go. One place. It's the tabernacle. The tabernacle's in Shiloh. That's where you go. I don't care how long it takes you to get there. That's where you go. And now we have this massive rock structure. The 9.5 tribes see it, and they make this assumption. This is what it says in Leviticus 17 in the Torah. And you shall say to them, any one of the house of Israel, or of the strangers who sojourn among you, who offers a burnt offering or a sacrifice and does not bring it to the entrance of the tent of meeting, the tabernacle, to offer it to the Lord, that man shall be cut off from the people. But God also says in the Torah, don't jump to a conclusion without all the facts. So that's what the 9.5 tribes do next. Look at verse 13. Then the people of Israel, meaning the 9.5 tribes, sent to the people of Reuben and Gad and Manasseh in the land of Gilead Phinehas, the son of Eleazar the priest, and with him 10 chiefs, one from each of the tribal families of Israel, every one of them the head of a family among the clans of Israel. And they came to the people of the Reubenites and the Gadites and Manassites in the land of Gilead, and this is what they said to them, verse 16. Thus says the whole congregation of the Lord, what is this breach of faith that you have committed against Gad, the God of Israel, in turning away this day from following the Lord, by building yourselves an altar this day in rebellion against God? Did not Achan the son of Zerah break faith in the matter of the devoted things at Jericho, and wrath fell upon all the congregation of Israel? And he did not perish alone for his iniquity. This is quite diplomatic, isn't it? The 9.5 tribes are convinced. They get near the river, they look out there, and they're like, oh my gosh, what is that massive rock structure? That's an altar. And our brothers and sisters of Israel built it. They're already going pagan. And they had good reason to think this. Before we get too hard on them, first of all, it's a massive rock structure that looks like an altar. Second of all, the Torah is explicit. You do this, people start dying. God's really jealous with his people. And third, and this is the most important detail, they have history of this happening already. The text says that Achan stole those devoted things. We know that story from when Jeff Clipness preached on that, when he held back some of the goods that were supposed to be destroyed. There's a more important story, though, in the history of Israel. And it takes place in a chapter I'm not going to read. It's in the book of Numbers, chapter 25. And in this chapter, Moses is alive. He's bringing them up around the southern part of the Jordan in the Dead Sea. They work their way up into the place of Moab. This is right before Moses dies. And they get to the place called Peor. And a bunch of the Israelites start sleeping with the Moabite women, who are complete godless pagans. They start literally worshiping their gods and sacrificing things to their gods. It's just ugly. And God tells Moses, dude, deal with this because this is not good. And they deal with it. And then there's one brash dude left that just is parading himself around with this essentially Canaanite whore. And Phinehas, the priest, takes a spear and runs it right through this Israelite guy and the Moabite woman, and they're dead, and God lifts the plague off them after 24,000 Israelites died. This is what's in their head. This is the history that they are remembering. These 9.5 tribes watched all of this take place, and they realize how jealous God is for his people. And they're thinking, man, these 2.5 tribes are putting us all in jeopardy, and in particular, they're putting themselves in jeopardy. So they have history. They have history of what took place. So what do we do with this story? Well, there's 3 or 4 thoughts that I want to close with that are almost like different sides of the same coin, if you will. And they're very obvious thoughts because most thoughts that I have are very obvious. But it's the obvious ones we seem to have trouble moving into. The first one is this: don't assume you're right. In fact, we should be all day long making the assumption that we are probably part of the issue, no matter what is actually taking place, right? We get so inflamed with this sense of self-righteousness. We see something for 5 seconds and we've got the entire story in our head. And then we live out that judgment. And what makes it hard to not assume we're right is there's history. We have history with each other. My wife and I met in high school. I was 16, she was 18. We get married when I'm 22 and she's 23. And as I've shared many times in the church, I was like the Pope of approval addicts. I mean, just the biggest placater in the world. And so when you live like that and you hate conflict and everybody's got to like you, which is impossible, you inevitably have to promise things you can't deliver on. You then tell people things were actually finished when they weren't, or you did something and didn't forget. And so this dynamic in my marriage was just beautiful because my wife would ask me something and then I would not want to get in trouble. And so lying seems kind of harsh. I would say, reframe the story in a way that seemed more positive. My wife, who grew up completely different and whose makeup was blaming, so mine is placating, hers was finding fault, because in her family, if you were wrong, you pretty much died, so you were never wrong. So I would then reframe, you're with me on this, the story. Linda would smell blood. And she's really good at this. She should have been a lawyer, and she would begin the interrogation. And then the story would break down, and then she would be mad at me not only because of what I did, but because I was such a weenie that I couldn't just muster up the truth when I spoke to her, right? So now she completely doesn't trust me and doesn't like me and doesn't believe me. And this went on for a solid 10 years of marriage, plus 5 years of dating. So we're 15 years into the relationship, and this is just working beautifully dysfunctionally. Until God got a hold of me and said, dude, I approve of you. You've been washed by the blood of my son. You don't need everybody else's approval. You have mine. Well, that took 3 or 4 years of some solid counseling and friendships and really working at it, stepping out of ministry literally where I didn't teach for 4 years. And I got a hold of it. And it became something not a part of my life. But here's what happens in relationships. We had too much history. So every time something would happen that looked like I was placating and covering and lying, and people are shaking their head already, especially the husbands, my wife would put her foot on my neck and not let me up. And I would just get enraged because I worked so hard to change this, and now I'm not even getting credit for it. And that took years for her, for me to actually show a trustworthiness and an honesty in living. Still, probably once a year, after 31 years of marriage, something will look like I'm being a placater, but Linda's really good about it now. She'll say, it kind of, sort of looks like what you're doing now. It looked like a little while ago. And I will say, no. And literally, it's not even in my head because it's such a foreign part of me now. And so we've had to learn, for me not to get defensive, but for her to give me to trust me in that and not assume she's right, which is the next side of the coin, and that is benefit of the doubt. When couples know that I've met with many couples in this church, that this is a mantra for me in marriage and in relationship. We have to become benefit of the doubt people. This is what my dad has majored in life. We have to adopt an attitude where we're giving folks the benefit of the doubt. Now, that does not mean we just completely drop our guard and we become just fools with people and just say, here, I've opened my account to you. Take it, if you will. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying we don't bring deep wisdom into every situation. I think we need to do that a lot. But because I realize people can be extremely mean and hurtful and vile and untrustworthy. We all know that. We all know that, which is the only reason we're guarded in the beginning, to begin with. But at the same time, we have to develop a posture where we start giving the benefit of the doubt, knowing we really don't know the whole story. All we have is what this is looking at. That's all we have. And then a pile of history that we bring into it, regardless of whether it's fair. I love what the Proverbs have to say about this. Proverbs 19:11 says this, good sense, this is benefit of the doubt, good sense makes one slow to anger. Meaning, I may not be right. And it is to his glory to overlook an offense. Proverbs 17:9 says this, whoever covers, literally the word means to forgive or close it. Close it. This is what my wife had to do. That's hard work when you have an idiot like me for 15 years proving her that I'm not trustworthy. Now she's going to close the book on that? That's hard work. Amen? Whoever closes the book on an offense seeks love, but he who repeats a matter separates close friends. We enter the situation, rather than I'm right, and I'm not going to give you the benefit of the doubt, but we say things like, it looks like this, and this is kind of what I'm seeing, but there's a great chance I'm wrong. So help me. And by the way, we don't do that, and I'm going to catch 90% of you on this, because we already know we're right. So now we're going to trap them with kindness. That's not what we're doing when we do this. We have to go into this in a sincere way, knowing we don't know the whole story. Any other approach than this is just self-righteous. We get so inflamed with the sense of I'm right, and I'm convinced I'm right, when we really only have, at maximum, half the story. You know, when you look at these sets of tribes, there's an inherent issue. The Westerners are not the Easterners, and the Easterners are not the Westerners. And by the way, the Easterners are on the eastern side because they live a certain way. That's why they're in that land. They're shepherd people, essentially. They're not crop people. They're totally different. They think differently, they live differently, they approach life differently. That doesn't mean either side is wrong. It just means they see life differently. We're not right because something makes sense to us. And there's a gotcha. See, everything makes sense to us, but we're all a little psychotic. So if we realize it makes sense to me, but I'm half nuts, then I may not want to trust that it's making sense to me in this particular moment. Third, and this is right, the third side of this coin, the goal is love and unity. The goal is never to be right. We say this all the time in this church. Being right is totally overrated. You can be right and completely out of relationship. Who cares? You're right. Big deal. What I love is when you read this text, we'll see how excited these people are when they find out they're wrong. Where did I leave off on the verses? I think I just skipped a whole set of verses that I was going to read. Let's read on. Verse 21. Then the people of Reuben, the people of Gad, the half-tribe of Manasseh, said in answer to the heads of the families of Israel, the mighty one, God, the Lord, the mighty one, God, the Lord, he knows. Isn't this cool? That's what a clear conscience does. See, when I really corrected this thing in my life, I could look at my wife with fervency and say, I know, and God knows why I did this. Now, whether you buy into it, that'll be your problem. He knows, and let Israel itself know then. If it was in rebellion or in breach of faith against the Lord, do not spare us today. For building an altar to turn away from following the Lord, or if we did so to offer burnt offerings or grain offerings or peace offerings on it, may the Lord himself take vengeance. No, but we did it from fear that in time to come your children might say to your children, what have you to do with the Lord, the God of Israel? Look at why they really did it. They didn't want either side to forget that they're one. For the Lord has made the Jordan a boundary between us and you. You people of Reuben and people of Gad, you have no portion in the Lord, so your children might make our children cease to worship God, not let him come to the tabernacle. Verse 26, therefore we said, let us now build a structure, not for burnt offerings, not for sacrifice, but as a witness between us and you, and between our generations after us, that we do perform the sacrifice, the service of the Lord in his presence with the burnt offerings and sacrifices and peace offerings. So your children will not say to our children in time to come, you have no portion in the Lord. When Phinehas the priest and the chief priest, listen to this. When Phinehas the priest and the chiefs of the congregation, the heads of the families of Israel, who were with him, heard the words that the people of Reuben and Gad and Manasseh spoke, it was great in their eyes. Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the priest, said to the people of Reuben and the people of Gad and the people of Manasseh, today we know that the Lord is in our midst because you have not committed this breach of faith against the Lord. Now you have delivered the people of Israel from the hand of the Lord. Verse 32, then Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the priest, and the chiefs returned to the people of Reuben and Gad in the land of Gilead, in the land of Canaan, to the people of Israel, and brought back this word. And the report was great in their eyes of the people of Israel. And the people of Israel blessed God and spoke no more of making war against them to destroy the land where the people of Reuben and the people of Gad were settled. And the people of Reuben and the people of Gad called the altar witness, for they said, it is a witness between us that the Lord is God. Phinehas finds out he's wrong, and he's excited. Now this is hard for Doug to kind of, I hate being wrong. My wife, if you will go over to her, and please don't do this, because she'll love to talk about it. This is one of my hardest things in my life, to just say, I'm wrong, right? But you look at Phinehas, this is how you know how humble this guy is. This is how you know his goal is actually togetherness, not being right. Because as soon as he finds out, he goes, oh, Praise God. And then Israel does the same thing. They go, oh, this is the greatest news ever. We're wrong, we're wrong, we're wrong. That's so great. Let's celebrate our wrongness. I just think that is so beautiful. And quite often, I think we make the goal in relational struggles like, well, I just have to get this off my chest. That is terrible. This is not in Scripture. The goal that may be the means to the ultimate end. The goal is not to just, well, I just have to say this, and that's the most important thing. No, actually, the goal is love. So then we need to ask ourselves, do I, like Phineas, do I, like these 9.5 tribes, do I actually want what's best for the person that I'm actually talking to right now? See, if you have their best interest in mind, and I don't think you should actually go talk to them until you work yourself into a place where you say, I genuinely hope I'm wrong and I want life to work for them. Even if I'm going to confront, even if I'm going to have hard conversations, do I want what's best for this other person? If you do that, what I've found is it's hard to go wrong. One last verse, Joshua 22, verse 19. But now, if the land of your possession is unclean, this is what the 9.5 tribes tell these 2.5 tribes. Pass over into the Lord's land, where the Lord's tabernacle stands. Make for yourselves a possession among us. Only don't rebel against God. Wow. Or make us as rebels by building an altar other than the altar of the Lord your God. You know what? They want what's best for them so much. What they say is, just take a bunch of our land. We would rather have you here and us have less than have you there and have us not together. Isn't that cool? One last thought. And Isaac, if you guys want to make your way up. The last thought is inside issues in this context, and we'll see this over and over in Scripture, get way more press than the outside issues. So often when we read Israel's history, their greatest issues did not come from outside of Israel. They came from inside the room. The greatest problems I've seen in 20 years have nothing to do with the outside influences around this church. It's all been within here. And it generally stems from, I think I'm right, I think you're wrong, and I'm not going to give you the benefit of the doubt. Greg's shaking his hand. He's been here the whole time. This is lousy. Churches die over this. Churches split over this. I've seen this church on more than one occasion in 20 years split over this concept. That is just so heart-wrenching to me. Let's learn from these people. I would rather lose, Joshua says, and Phineas says in Israel. I would rather come out on the losing end and have us be one. Unfortunately, you read the book of Judges, and that's exactly what they do. The biggest problem they have in the book of Judges, the very next book, is it says all the 12 tribes functioned on their own, and then they did right in their own eyes. How about, I could be wrong. Not in that one. Not, I did right in my own eyes. Not in that one. Where's the benefit of the doubt in there? It's gone. I'm just me. I'm right. I got my own perspective. And either you move into my circle or it's a huge blessing to see them in Israel in the book of Joshua. And it's a massive warning to us in the book of Judges. And they are right next to each other. And on that positive note, let's pray. We turn to the three of you and realize we have no greater example than the love and the benefit of the doubt and the encouragement and the defaulting that we watch with the three of you. And we need to do more than just try to exhibit you. We are literally made in your image. This is who we are. We are, through the blood of Christ, like you. And we know when we are not close to one another how it feels. It's just the worst feeling on this planet. Help us, Father, to remind us to make us more like what we see in this chapter, to assume that we have limited view, to assume that what we think is reality is very often not. And we would seek to know and understand the hearts of one another. Guard us, protect us. Watch over us with an eye that this world has never seen. And we thank you for your commitment to us. And we love you for it. In Jesus' name, amen.